So now we have the sectoral experts here who have a very close association with the steel industry for a long time. So my association with the steel industry or knowledge of the sector is because of, as a reporter, in earlier years, I used to write on the steel industry. And then subsequently as an editor of copies and all, editorials and all, I have an association with it. But I'm generally a macroeconomic journalist who looks after multiple sectors. So the advantage I have is I can have a bird's eye view of what is happening in the sector. So basically, I want to start on a very optimistic note about the steel industry. Because when India's other sectors in the economy, the targets set by the government and the real achievement, there is a huge gap. If it is oil production, gas production, the energy self-dependence, self-reliance, we can see that whatever is set as a target, actually we are not only missing the target, we are slipping on the situation. Manufacturing as a share of GDP, we had set a higher target. We are slipping on that. Crude oil production, domestic crude oil production, we are slipping. Domestic natural gas production, we are slipping. On exports, generally our merchandise exports, we are even growing at a slower rate than the world trade growth. We can attribute the current problems to the global headwinds, geopolitical situation and all, which are partly correct, but it's also because of the structural problems in the economy. So generally, when we are not I am not very pessimistic, I am not that optimistic about the entire situation. In steel sector, is growing at a faster rate than the global average. You have a 6% CAGR in the last 4 or 5 years in production as well as capacity creation. Our demand is growing at the fastest rate among major economies. If you see from a 20-year perspective or a 30-year perspective, you can see that China's growth, the demand itself is going to decline over a 2-decade period, where much of the demand, the global demand, will come from India. If a single country, if you take, the demand will be more generated from India than China will decline, even other countries. The world minus China and India is also growing at a slower rate, relatively slower rate. So India has its own domestic industry, domestic demand itself can be a huge driver for India's steel production. When it comes to our domestic demand, we have the infrastructure sector. We have a huge infrastructure pipeline. Our infrastructure creation is going to continue for the next 2 decades at least at a very rapid pace. It has to continue. Whether it will continue is another question, but it is required to continue. And then we have urbanization, a rapid urbanization of the country is happening. Urbanization means from 15 years from now, we will require investments to the tune of 60 lakh crore in urbanization, where the demand steel is a major commodity which will be helping drive the urbanization process. And if our population, 60 crore people will be living in cities in another maybe by 2035 or so. So infrastructure, huge infrastructure creation which is still happening, which is still at a relatively early stage for the country. And then the urbanization process. And then government schemes like PM Awas Yojana, house construction and all. These are all going to drive domestic demand in a very serious manner. And then internationally, we can be, if you compare with the other industries, our conventional industries in India, like textile and garments, gems and jewelry, engineering goods, these sectors are very labor-intensive sectors. But these labor-intensive sectors, we are not seeing the required level of growth, whether it is in exports or domestic investments or the overall growth of the value added in those sectors. Actually, in textile and garments, gems and jewelry, etc., Mr. Srivastava is here, he would know better. There is a decline in export growth, whereas the overall export is growing, almost a flat rate or very marginal growth rate we are having. There is a decline in growth rate in labor-intensive sectors. So steel is also a potential sector where we can export. And it is also a labor-intensive sector, where China is already going to withdraw from the steel sector, which is evident from the data and the projections. And the international situation is that All other countries are putting tariffs. US is putting tariffs, huge tariffs on steel. European Union is putting tariff. We have the carbon tax additionally. And then even UK has recently, the UK BTA, the free trade agreement we are going to have with the UK is delayed because of UK's plan to cut import restrictions on steel and put additional tariffs on steel. So we are having a problem in the export market. But whatever, even though the entire steel sector in the world is not growing at a, demand is not growing at a not going to grow at a very rapid pace in the coming years, whatever growth is there, India has a huge opportunity to cash in on that. But in addition to our huge domestic demand. So there, now our exports, the steel ministry will say in its press statement, 35% growth, 40% growth, but it is a very low base. We are exporting 3 million tons. Every 1 year you will be a net exporter of steel, another year we will be a net importer of steel. So that means we are hugely underutilizing our capacity to export in the steel sector. That means how can we export? There comes this subject matter of this particular conference. How to cut costs of Indian steel making, how to adopt new technologies. Now we have an alliance between Indian steel makers like JSW and POSCO has an alliance for technology adoption. And then we have a raw material base. We have iron ore. We don't have enough coking coal. Iron ore, multiple restrictions have been imposed by government on multiple times. So the iron ore capacity, iron ore production in the country is not growing at the pace it should be growing. And then we have a problem with the depletion of the high-grade iron ore reserves. So the beneficiation technology, and followed by pelletization, will be an important sector where we have to invest in. Beneficiation plus pelletization can reduce the rapid use of depletion of our natural resources, iron ore resources, and even the low-grade iron ore can be better utilized so that the high-grade reserves can be kept or conserved. So there we don't see much of an investment. We have plans. The problem with India is that we have a scheme for every problem we have. Our policies are not lacking in terms of understanding our intent, but the scale, the magnitude of that and the implementation of this is where we are lacking. So we have the PLA schemes. So there's a huge difference between what we can achieve and what actually the PLA scheme is delivering. Similar is the case with this beneficiation. Earlier, the former Chief Secretary was mentioning about the beneficiation technology and the pelletization and how it will help. So that is one sector we have to focus a lot. Basically, how to better utilize our resources. Then, of course, the resources which we don't have enough, like coking coal. There is already a plan to increase the coking coal, domestic coking coal availability to 140 million tons or something. But that is also many miles away. No, it is not an easy thing to happen actually. So there we have the international collaborations, picking up stakes in foreign ventures. Those kind of things may be helpful, and which will help in reducing the huge vulnerability of the global coking coal prices. Basically, the global market is not market determined now. We are facing a global market which is hugely protected, increasingly protectionist, and huge tariffs. So wherever you go, you may have a problem, whether it is raw material availability or in terms of our export prospects. We see the tariff issues and the problems of the shift away from a market-determined and rule-based international trade that will adversely affect our plans. So that is how we have to strategize a lot. See, import substitution is per se, earlier most of the economists used to talk about free trade, removal of tariffs, lowering of tariffs. Now we are having selective import substitution in many sectors. For example, the high-tech industries like semiconductors, solar panels and all, we are trying to indigenize our production. The whole value chain we are trying to create here. That is a good thing. That means import substitution in select sectors is very, very much needed, but not in the steel sector. In the steel sector, you see a conflict between the primary steel producers intent and the secondary steel producers and the whole downstream industry. That is a permanent problem with India's steel sector. For example, the safeguard duties on steel industry, which may help a large industrial, integrated steel producers for some time, temporarily, as a knee-jerk measure. We sometimes import heavy duties on imports. Steel industry is not a sector where you should try, protect the upstream players so much, because it is an industry where we need value addition across the entire chain, from the upstream industry to the downstream steel industry and the end large user industry base, including we have to create high potential, high grade, high strength steel for automotive industry. We have the EV industry now coming up, where we need a special battery kind of steel. So all these aspects have to be taken into account. So import substitution may not be a right thing to do for the steel industry, where it may be useful in certain other industries where we need to indigenize the domestic manufacturing. And then another important aspect is the steel scrap usage of steel scraps, recycling of steel scraps. So there is a lack of availability of steel scraps in the country. So there is a need to produce more scraps domestically and store it, and procure them and use for the productive purpose of steel making. Because steel scrap technology, recycling technology, can reduce the water consumption. It can also substantially reduce fossil fuel energy consumption also. So steel scrapping is one area where we need to focus more on. So generally, if you, I think most of the things which I wanted to say is that, and then another aspect is the logistics, of course. Logistics is, in India, the dedicated freight corridors now, which are going to come, Eastern dedicated freight corridor and Western dedicated freight corridors, and the port capacity. There is a focus on port capacity. Earlier, there used to be a lot of control on port tariffs. There was a tariff authority of major ports, and those tariffs are now being relatively deregulated, and a lot of public investments are now happening in the port sector. But there are also concentration of market capacity is a problem, concentration of market power. So the port tariffs have to come down if you want to export more. The beneficiation technology, pelletization, better raw material sourcing, technology adoption, because we already have the advantage of cost in terms of manpower cost, to a certain extent raw material cost also. We have to work further on that for our productive capacity to increase, for our international competitiveness to increase, so that we can completely optimally capitalize on our domestic demand as well as global growth. So logistics aspect, he was referring to, we are not having, just now Mr. Sen was referring to, we should have bigger trucks, which is a very preliminary thing. We should have had it much earlier, years ago. We don't have large trucks even now. So this dedicated freight corridor, port capacity expansion, so that the turnaround time at the ports can be reduced. These are the things we have to focus more on the logistics side, when it comes to the transportation part. In the production side, I have already mentioned the areas which I want to highlight.